You're listening to another ASCI Lounge podcast.
Welcome to the ASCI Lounge. I'm Monique Fennick, Australasian Supply Chain Institute, and this is the third episode in the Future of Work series. This is a collaboration between 6 Degrees, AFGC, and ASCI. Together, we've put together some research from our communities, and today we have with us, joining us on the ASCI Lounge, Alastair Penny, who's the Associate Director of 6 Degrees. Welcome, Alastair.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Thank you, Alastair, and you were the mastermind behind this research project, so it's good to have you on the ASCI Lounge to give our audience a little bit of idea around the findings of the report, what you found was interesting, what you found was surprising, and with your 15 years of experience in the recruitment space, I think you're very well geared to give us your perspective as well on where you think the future of work is headed for supply chain management.
Yeah, hopefully well placed rather than a mastermind, I'd say. But
So kick us off with some of the key findings of the report, Alastair.
Yeah, so there was some more obvious findings, I think, in the fact that data obviously featured highly. The need for adaptability within our leaders and within our employees featured highly, and executive level presence was also an important one. But I think a few maybe less surprising features were the fact that the promotion of supply chain by supply chain people as an industry in order to attract people was something that came out of it, and the fact that yes, people are talking about data and people are talking about AI and machine learning and Internet of Things, but actually the reality is in Australian supply chains still there isn't that much being done at the moment.
Yeah, because we had episode 1 was an interview with Rob Stummer, the CEO of CISPRO, and from his technology experience, he really thought that AI and automation were fully fledged already in a lot of areas of supply chain, particularly in mining. So is it just specific to industry?
Yes, I should my points there are, yeah, absolutely. Automation is here, and AI is here, but in forms that are nowhere near the level of what is out there. So there's still a long way to go, but automation and AI are here. But I think some of the buzzwords around blockchain and augmented reality and virtual reality are still a long way off. So we're on the right path, and we're certainly heading in the right direction. But I think in terms of actually, right at the cutting edge of technology, I would say we're still a bit of a way off.
Okay, so kick us off with some of the more specifics around the technology. So agility, collaboration, and changing the thinking from supply chain to supply ecosystems as things become less and less linear.
Yeah, it's an interesting area in terms of how the whole ecosystem works, and one of the points around supply chain being prevented from moving forward is the fact that we have a lot of legacy systems and legacy infrastructure. So to move from that linear model to more of an ecosystem is hard. It requires investment, and these days you can't have investment without ROI. So we're kind of stuck a little bit as businesses want to progress, but you can't get a business case through unless you can prove ROI within 2 or 3 years, and therefore we're not going to move to those ecosystems as quickly as we'd like. I think I made the point when we presented this is that if you look at an ecosystem from a business, but within a geography, Australia has a lot of infrastructure that prevents that, and there are smart cities around the world that can adapt to these ecosystems a lot quicker, bypass the legacy technological age that we're in at the moment, and move forward. And that's what's going to attract investment from overseas. So there is a bit of a danger in Australia where those ecosystems that we're heading for are just being slightly restricted because of what's in place and the hard process for trying to get new capex and new infrastructure signed off.
Yeah, because we know that data is important, but strategic thinking and leadership is, from the findings, considered really important.
Yeah, so to me that says all about data's important, but it's what we do with it that counts. I think in the findings, only 21% said data was an important part of supply chain. Now, I think what that comes down to is that people are in control of leadership and strategic thinking, so that's why they sort of nominated that. I still think there's an opportunity there for everyone in supply chain to start talking about supply chain as data management and get that conversation happening on a wider scale, so that whenever information or conversations are happening around data and implementation of technology around data, supply chain has a seat at the table. Because I think if you were to speak to most supply chain leaders, that they would have data ahead of or involved in strategic thinking, because you can't have strategic thinking without data. So it's an interesting point of how we position ourselves, but also how we evolve our thinking of what supply chain actually is.
And talk to me about agility as an ability to identify issues and respond quickly. 44% said that was most important, just behind strategic thinking. Is that a skill set you really look for in supply chain leaders?
Absolutely, yeah. I think you can base that down to the reality is we don't know what the future holds. We can't specify exactly what roles are going to be there and what the mix of those roles are going to be. But what we do know is there's going to be change, and there's going to be consistent change. So you need people moving forward in the future who can cope with that change and almost reinvent themselves sometimes in terms of adapting with what the environment puts upon them. So that agility to work with that and evolve with that over time is going to be critical over the next 10 to 15 years as a skill set. It's going to be less around, and I think experience in your industry is at 3%. So it's less about what's happened, it's more about what's coming.
Yeah, because in episode 2, we spoke with Subra, the head of planning and logistics for Australia and New Zealand for Kellogg Australia. And what was interesting in that interview, and what Subra pointed out, was that haven't we been here before when manufacturing was taken offshore and we really had to respond quickly to totally transforming our supply chains and our supply chain teams. I suppose, is the difference this time that we have to respond faster?
Yeah, I mean, we've been through as a generation and as an industry, we've been through a lot of changes, and that's the manufacturing one going offshore is a good one. I think the difference here is the speed of change is just getting faster and faster, and there is no doubt that technology will evolve faster than businesses can use that technology. So there's going to be a lag between what's available and what businesses are actually doing. So it's how do you navigate your way through from where we are now to the future? And I think that the answer to that is not by going in one large jump, is trying to go from A to Z. It's about that incremental change. What can we do in the short term to get us there? Robotic process automation is probably the stepping stone to going to fully fledged machine learning and AI. But we've got to make those incremental changes rather than looking for the large leap, I think.
Yeah. I want to get to capability in a moment, but before we do, there was a contradiction in the survey, wasn't there, around culture?
Yes. So we we surveyed about 120 leaders in supply chain, and half of those were in $500 million turnover businesses. So, we're speaking to the leaders of supply chain in Australia, and understandably, they thought supply chain should be at the heart of overall business strategy. We'd be in a bit of trouble if it wasn't. But the contradiction was that of those people that thought, I think it was 90%, said that it was at the heart of strategy. Only half felt that their business was ready to cope with that change. So we know change is coming. We know agility and adaptability are key skills that are required in the future. Yet we still feel that our businesses and our supply chains aren't culturally ready to take on that change. And that's got to be a fundamental of leaders at the moment in terms of how they're evolving their supply chain, is looking at their employees and looking at their staff and saying, who here is ready for change? How do we make the business more change ready? How do we evolve that thinking? Because until the business is change ready, it's very hard to get any kind of changes into from be that technology or process or people.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see that by industry, if there's many differences from FMCG, grocery, mining, the other kind of industries that perhaps act a bit slower or need to act faster to be customer facing. So it'd be interesting to see how that varies.
Yeah, and we have some of that data available, and interestingly, some of the future reports we're going to do are going to focus on the likes of sales and marketing. So it'll be interesting to see what their view is of change and change readiness compared to supply chain. But they're
Yes,
things that
indeed.
will come out in the future.
Looking forward to that. So let's move our sights onto talent. So we've talked about data being so central to supply chain. So how did our supply chain leaders fare in terms of them being able to um, transfer their supply chain teams into this focus of data?
Yeah, an interesting one. I mean, when I presented the information, I asked, before revealing what the sort of future job growth was, or where the growth was going to come from. I asked the room to talk about what they felt were going to be the jobs that were going to create this growth, and obviously they came back with data manager and data scientists. But then when I asked who has a proper data scientist within their supply chain team, there were no hands that went up. So data is clearly important, and most businesses will have a supply chain analyst or maybe a master data person. But in terms of someone that is literate in a language like a Python or something like that, no one has that at the moment. But interestingly, speaking to when the head of coal supply chain spoke, he said he had 10 people in their supply chain who are proper data scientists.
Wow, just think about that for a moment. I mean, that is a customer facing organization, fast moving. So they place high importance there. 10 people.
Yeah. So, and they're investing more and more in that space as well. So, clearly the retailers are pushing the boundaries on how to manage data within supply chain, and they now are holding more and more of the data out there, both supplier and themselves, so they can act faster, move quicker, more strategically, and obviously from a supplier perspective, that there has to be some way that they can either get involved, get access to that data, or put in scientists in their own supply chain so they can at least try and match that and have an equal conversation with their end customers, rather than be dictated to, which I'm not saying is happening, but there's a danger that it could.
Yeah, and I wonder if supply chain is an attractive kind of space for data analysts to start their career or build their career, because it's certainly different to finance and some other areas where they may not have seen material flow as physically.
Well, that's one of the big findings, I think, is that as an industry, we need to promote supply chain a lot more. I think it was 33% have graduate intake or graduate schemes. Only 1 in 5 leaders has some kind of affiliation with an academic institute. Now, the marketing business units, the sales business units, they're all over the universities. They are scrambling for talent and finance as well, and getting these really smart people into their businesses. And at the moment, supply chain isn't. They're sitting with what they've got, which is a lot of very smart people, but we're maybe missing that new breed of what supply chain will be. And the quicker we get to thinking of ourselves as moving data as well as product, the better, because that will push the agenda of actually going out and trying to get these talent first. I think I said in my presentation, we as supply chain leaders need to be knocking on the door of HRDs and putting talent strategies in place to find these people, because if we're not, you can bet finance, sales and marketing are, and that leaves supply chain at the back of the queue. And we need to do more to attract those caliber of people into supply chain.
Well, I'd love to pick your brains on that on another episode, because that's really interesting that you say that. We're not at career fairs, we're not pushing it from the ground up, and it's something that we should definitely look at.
There was a person I spoke to who worked in a business where they moved graduates around from marketing to supply chain. He made the point that often when people go to supply chain, they stay there because they can see what a real tangible difference they can make to the overall business. We just need to make more effort to get them there in the first place.
Nearly every member I talk to say they fell into supply chain and stayed there, so that will resonate well.
Yeah, well, in the survey, it was 60% is still people that fell into supply chain. So we're still a long way off of really attracting people and making it interesting. And there's a whole different tangent of conversation we could go down in terms of education, how we educate our children at school these days, how we get them to think about project learning and critical thinking, and get them to understand the world of work, of where it is and how it's changing. But at the moment, it's probably supply chain as an industry that has to really push that agenda.
Yeah, love to talk about that. So let's talk about millennials, since we're on this topic of new entries to the industry, because these guys have got something to offer according to the survey.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's no doubt that managing millennials is tricky. They think differently to the likes of Gen X and the baby boomers. It is more about what's in it for me a little bit, which is hard, and that's not just in supply chain, that's across the board, and it's a bit of a generalization, but seems to be the case. So how do we make the most out of these? Because although they're seen as tricky to manage, overwhelmingly the survey said that they're fast adopters of technology. They have diversity of thought, so they can bring new ideas to supply chain, and with sustainability and ethical supply really high on supply chain agenda. Millennials are traditionally very focused on corporate social responsibility and making sure that supply chains are more ethical. So I think there's a lot, both in terms of adoption of technology and sustainability, where millennials can be used to a much greater extent than they are at the moment.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. I mean, there are, as you mentioned, some losers and some winners in this game. So if you're a millennial, then don't head towards drivers or warehouse supervisors or operatives or forklift drivers, because they're on the way out in the next 10 years. I think 10 years is a long time, isn't it?
Yeah, and they already are. No surprise to anyone listening to this that the more manual roles are being reduced. Most supply chains are trying to do more with less, and with automation and with AI, a lot of those roles are being made redundant, unfortunately. It is all about data, and it's all about interpretation. Data manager, IBP, these roles that look at data, but then go to the next level, saying, what does that mean in the business? How can we use that to define our strategy? That's where the where supply chain's heading, and those are the skills that the graduates or the early entrants in supply chain should be looking to evolve at the moment, and pushing their supply chain leaders to get that training done, because we've got a lot of talented people that are going to be working in our supply chains for the next 10, 20, 30 years, and there probably needs to be a lot of reskilling to get businesses to where they need to be.
So, in summary, Alistair, what's your takeaway from overall the report findings?
But I think it's no surprise that supply chain is changing. It is evolving. I think in Australia we're still waiting for that change to happen. I think we're not going to be the early adopters on a global scale. We're waiting to see what's happening in North America and Europe, and when the ROA becomes more easily achieved, that'll come through. But it's changing day by day, and if we can evolve our employee mix and our staff to with new training and with new understanding of technology, incrementally we can get closer to some of these sort of new age thinking and utilization of new technology.
Fantastic. Great to have you on the ASCI Lounge.
So
Thanks
thanks
for
for having
joining
me.
us, Alistair.
Absolutely.
It was a really great report, and you can download the report from this description in the podcast, or you can contact inquiries@asci.org.au for more information. Thanks for joining us, ASCI members. Thanks, Alistair.
No, again, thanks for having me. All the best.
It's been fun,
Cheers.
and bye for now.
Bye bye.